This possessed Plymouth Fury terrified audiences in 1983, but the real story behind the cameras might be even stranger than the supernatural carnage on screen. From twin sister pranks to cursed car crushes, deliberately added profanity to reach an R rating, and a stuntman driving while literally on fire, the making of Christine was full of bizarre twists that rival the horror of the film itself. Here are 15 weird facts you didn't know about Christine's 1958 Plymouth Fury. Fact 1. The wrong color killed on day 1. Christine's very first kill happens before the car even leaves the factory floor, and it's wrapped in a historical impossibility that sharp-eyed car enthusiasts noticed immediately. In the opening scene of the 1983 film, we watch a brand-new 1958 Plymouth Fury roll down the assembly line in Detroit, and this particular car stands out for one glaring reason. It's painted in a stunning red and white color scheme that director John Carpenter chose to give the vehicle a sinister, eye-catching presence. The problem is that real 1958 Plymouth Furies were never, ever manufactured in red. In fact, they only came in one factory color option called buckskin beige with gold trim, which was a creamy off-white shade that looked nothing like Christine's blood red paint job. What makes this even more obvious in the film is that every single other Plymouth Fury visible on that same assembly line is correctly painted in the historical buckskin beige color, making Christine the lone red anomaly rolling past dozens of beige siblings. Stephen King's original novel actually addressed this issue by explaining that Christine was a special custom order with unique paint, but the movie never mentions this detail, so filmmakers just put a historically impossible red car right there on the factory floor and hoped audiences wouldn't notice. The visual impact was more important than accuracy, and it worked because that distinctive red and white paint scheme became one of Christine's most recognizable features and helped establish her as something unnatural and wrong from the very first frame, even before she slams her hood down on a worker's hand and kills another man who dared to ash his cigar on her pristine seats. Fact 2. F-bombs added to avoid a PG rating. Christine had a bizarre ratings problem that the filmmakers solved with some strategic swearing, and it all came down to the fact that the movie just wasn't violent or gory enough to automatically earn an R rating from the Motion Picture Association of America. According to screenwriter Bill Phillips, who discussed this on the DVD documentary, the film technically didn't contain enough blood, gore, or graphic violence to justify an R rating on its own merits, since most of the death scenes involved people getting hit by a car rather than explicit bloody carnage. This created a serious dilemma for Columbia Pictures, because back in 1983, the PG-13 rating didn't exist yet, which meant movies could only be rated G, PG, or R, with nothing in between for that middle ground of teenage-appropriate content. The studio and producers were genuinely worried that horror fans wouldn't show up to theaters for a Stephen King movie with a PG rating, because a PG rating suggested the film was tame and family-friendly rather than legitimately scary and intense. So Bill Phillips came up with a simple solution to artificially bump the rating up to the desired R level. He went through the script and deliberately inserted the F word and its various derivatives multiple times throughout the dialogue, especially during scenes with the high school characters, knowing that excessive profanity would push the film into R-rated territory regardless of the violence level. Phillips later recalled on the commentary track that this decision drew some criticism at the time from people who felt the language was unnecessary or excessive. But the strategy worked perfectly, and Christine received its R rating, which helped market the film as a serious horror movie that adults and teenagers would want to see rather than a watered-down scary movie for kids. Fact 3. Kevin Bacon chose dancing over the devil car. Kevin Bacon came incredibly close to becoming the face of Christine, but he made a last-minute decision that completely changed the trajectory of his career and left the possessed Plymouth Fury in someone else's hands. Director John Carpenter and producer Richard Kobritz were actively searching for fresh young talent to play the lead role of Arnie Cunningham, the nerdy high school student who becomes obsessed with the demonic car, and they wanted relatively unknown actors who wouldn't overshadow the vehicle itself as the true star of the film. Kevin Bacon auditioned for the part in the early 1980s when he was still a rising actor with only a handful of small roles under his belt, including minor parts in Animal House and Friday the 13th, and both Carpenter and Kobritz thought he would be perfect for portraying Arnie's transformation from awkward loser to confident and dangerous young man under Christine's supernatural influence. The filmmakers were so impressed with Bacon's audition that they actually offered him the role, but then another opportunity came knocking that Bacon simply couldn't refuse. He was also offered the lead role of Ren McCormack in Footloose, the dancing rebel teenager in the movie about a town that banned dancing. Bacon had to make a choice between playing a possessed car owner in a horror film or playing a charismatic dancer fighting for freedom of expression, and he chose Footloose, which came out in 1984 and became a massive cultural phenomenon that turned Kevin Bacon into a household name and launched his career into the stratosphere. The role of Arnie Cunningham eventually went to Keith Gordon, who did an excellent job, but it's fascinating to imagine how different both Christine and Kevin Bacon's career might have been if he'd chosen the haunted car over the dance floor. Fact 4. The twin sister prank that made it into the film. Alexandra Paul pulled off one of the sneakiest pranks in movie history when she convinced her identical twin sister Caroline to impersonate her on the set of Christine. And the best part is that director John Carpenter had absolutely no idea he was filming the wrong person until after the cameras stopped rolling. Alexandra Paul, who played Lee Cabot, Arnie's girlfriend in the film, had an identical twin sister named Caroline who decided to visit the set one day during production. And the two sisters hatched a plan to see if they could fool the entire crew by switching places without telling anyone. Caroline Paul later wrote about the experience in detail, explaining how she showed up on set dressed exactly like her sister and simply walked into position when it was time to film a scene. And remarkably, nobody caught on to the switch, even though director John Carpenter was watching everything unfold right in front of him. The specific scene that Caroline filmed was actually a pretty important one involving a bulldozer, which is used near the end of the movie when the characters are trying to destroy Christine, and Caroline had to operate the clutch and other controls on the heavy machinery while pretending to be her actress sister. After Carpenter yelled cut and the scene was finished, the twins finally revealed their little trick to the director, who was reportedly both amused and a bit unsettled by how easily they had deceived him, later comparing the experience to Invasion of the Body Snatchers, where people get replaced by identical copies. Caroline joked in her account that her highly skilled clutch-pushing technique actually made it into the final version of the movie, which means that anyone watching Christine today is technically seeing Caroline Paul on screen during that bulldozer sequence, rather than the actress who was actually hired for the role. Fact 5. A stuntman drove while engulfed in flames. One of Christine's most memorable and terrifying sequences required stunt coordinator Terry Leonard to literally sit inside a car that was completely engulfed in flames and drive it down the highway at high speed, which is exactly as dangerous as it sounds and represents the kind of old-school practical stunt work that would probably never be approved today. The scene in question shows Christine hunting down the bully Buddy Repperton after she's been set on fire during a gas station explosion. And rather than using remote control technology or visual effects trickery, the production team decided to just light an actual Plymouth Fury on fire and have a real person drive it while the flames were actively burning. Terry Leonard, who served as the film's stunt coordinator and also performed many of the driving stunts himself, volunteered to be the person behind the wheel for this incredibly risky sequence, and he prepared by wearing a full Nomex firefighter suit, which is the same heat-resistant material that professional firefighters and race car drivers use for protection against extreme temperatures. The suit alone wasn't enough to keep him safe, though, because fire consumes oxygen rapidly, so Leonard also had to wear a complete breathing apparatus with an oxygen supply to make sure he wouldn't suffocate from smoke inhalation or oxygen deprivation while he was sealed inside the burning vehicle. Even with all these safety precautions in place, there was constant anxiety on set about the very real possibility that Christine's gas tank could explode at any moment while Leonard was still inside driving, which would have turned the stunt into an actual disaster rather than movie magic. But fortunately, everything went according to plan, and Leonard successfully completed the shot without any serious injuries. Fact 6. Most Christines weren't actually Furies. The production of Christine faced a serious automotive challenge because the movie's title character was supposed to be a 1958 Plymouth Fury. But that particular model was already extremely rare by the time filming began in 1983, and finding enough of them to destroy for stunts proved nearly impossible. Plymouth only manufactured 5,303 units of the 1958 Fury during its original production run, which was a very limited number even when the cars were brand new, and by the early 1980s, most of them had either been scrapped, rusted away, or were being carefully preserved by collectors who definitely weren't interested in selling them to a movie studio that planned to smash them to pieces. Director John Carpenter and his production team placed advertisements throughout Southern California and searched junkyards all across the country, desperately trying to track down as many Plymouth Furies as they could possibly find. But they ultimately managed to acquire only 23 to 24 cars total, and only a handful of those were actual genuine Plymouth Furies. The rest of the vehicles were Plymouth Belvederes and Plymouth Savoys, which were similar-looking models from the same era that could be modified and dressed up to pass as Furies on camera with the right paint job and trim pieces. The production crew then cannibalized parts from all of these various vehicles, taking pieces from some cars to repair or customize others, and through this process of automotive Frankenstein work, they managed to build 17 functional movie cars that could each serve different purposes. Some were pristine showcase versions used for beauty shots when Christine needed to look perfect. Others were hot rod versions with souped-up engines for high-speed chase scenes, and several were junked shells specifically created to be destroyed during the vandalism and final battle sequences. Fact 7. Christine's engine. Sound is a Mustang. Christine's distinctive and menacing engine roar that sends chills down viewers' spines throughout the movie is actually a complete audio fake, because the sound you hear doesn't come from any of the Plymouth Fury used during filming, but rather from a completely different car that belonged to one of the actors on set. The filmmakers made the decision to replace Christine's real engine sounds during post-production because they felt that the actual 1958 Plymouth Fury engines just didn't sound aggressive or threatening enough to match the supernatural evil that the car was supposed to represent on screen. What they needed was something that sounded more powerful, more distinctive, and more genuinely scary whenever Christine revved her engine or came roaring down the street to hunt her victims, so the sound department went looking for a better option and found the perfect solution in an unlikely place. The replacement audio they used came from a 1970 Mustang 428 Super Cobra Jet, which was a high-performance muscle car with a much more intimidating and memorable engine note than anything the Plymouth could produce. And the interesting twist is that this particular Mustang actually belonged to William Ostrander, the actor who played Buddy Repperton, the main bully who vandalizes Christine and later gets hunted down and killed by the vengeful car. So in a strange bit of irony, the villain's own personal vehicle provided the voice that made Christine sound so terrifying throughout the film, though there has been some conflicting information over the years about whether Ostrander's car was actually the source or if it was simply a Mustang of that same model. Either way, every growl, rumble, and roar that audiences associate with Christine's personality and presence is pure Ford Mustang rather than authentic Plymouth power. Fact 8. The self-healing magic was filmed upside down. The scene where Christine magically repairs herself after being vandalized by Buddy Repperton and his gang is one of the most memorable and technically impressive moments in the entire film, and the special effects team achieved this stunning visual through an ingenious combination of practical effects, clever camera work, and simple physics that required no computer-generated imagery whatsoever. Special effects supervisor Roy Arbogast and his team created a special version of Christine using soft plastic panels that were molded to look exactly like metal car body parts, and these plastic panels had a crucial advantage over real metal because they could bend and deform much more dramatically on camera, while still appearing authentic to audiences watching in theaters. The team then installed powerful hydraulic pumps inside this plastic-bodied car and attached cables to various points on the bodywork. So when the hydraulics were activated, they could pull the panels inward and make the car crumple and crush itself as if some invisible force was squeezing it from the inside out. Once they had filmed the car being crushed and damaged by the hydraulics, the effects team simply ran all of that footage in reverse during the editing process, which made it appear as though the crumpled and destroyed car was spontaneously healing itself and popping back into perfect shape through supernatural power. To make certain shots work even better, and to help with the physics of how the metal appeared to move and reform, some sequences were actually filmed with the car positioned completely upside down, because gravity would pull the panels in different and more interesting ways when the vehicle was inverted. And then those shots were also reversed and flipped right side up in post-production to create the final seamless effect that convinced audiences they were watching genuine movie magic. Fact 9. Carpenter never planned the regeneration scene. One of Christine's most iconic and visually stunning sequences almost didn't exist at all, because director John Carpenter originally had absolutely no intention of showing the car repair itself on screen and only changed his mind very late in the production process when he realized how much impact that scene could have. In Stephen King's original novel, Christine's ability to regenerate and fix her own damage is a major part of the story and demonstrates the supernatural power that makes the car so terrifying and unstoppable. But Carpenter initially planned to skip right over that element entirely in his film adaptation, possibly because he wasn't sure how to pull off such a complex visual effect convincingly, or because he thought it might be too expensive and time-consuming to achieve properly. However, at some point during production, Carpenter had a change of heart and decided that showing Christine's self-repair abilities was actually crucial to the movie. So he approached special effects supervisor Roy Arbogast, who had previously worked with Carpenter on The Thing and had proven himself capable of creating amazing practical effects on tight budgets and schedules. Carpenter gave Arbogast an incredibly short deadline of just 3 weeks to figure out how to make a car appear to magically fix itself on camera, which was an enormous challenge, considering that Arbogast and his team had to design and build special car bodies, create molds, install hydraulic systems, and test everything to make sure it would look believable when filmed. Despite the intense time pressure, Arbogast managed to develop the ingenious solution using hydraulics and reversed footage that became the foundation for one of the film's most memorable and frequently discussed scenes, and the regeneration sequence is now considered essential to Christine's identity as a horror film. Fact 10. The star was vegetarian during the choking scene. Alexandra Paul had to figure out a creative workaround during one of Christine's most intense and frightening scenes because her personal dietary choices conflicted directly with what the script required her to do on camera. The scene in question takes place at a drive-in theater where Lee, played by Paul, is sitting in Christine with her boyfriend Arnie when she starts choking on a hamburger, and the car maliciously locks its doors to prevent Arnie from helping her, making it clear that Christine is jealous and wants to kill this human rival for Arnie's affection. The problem for Alexandra Paul was that she's a vegetarian and doesn't eat meat, which meant she had no interest in actually biting into a real beef hamburger for the sake of the scene, but she also didn't want to create any disruption or extra work for the production by making her dietary restrictions into a big deal that would require the crew to find special vegetarian props or alternatives. Paul came up with a simple and practical solution that allowed her to perform the scene convincingly without compromising her principles or causing any delays on set. Before each take, she would carefully push the beef patty back inside the hamburger bun so that it was hidden from view. And then, when the cameras rolled, she would take what looked like normal bites, but was actually just her nibbling on the bread portion of the bun while avoiding the meat entirely. This clever bit of on-set problem-solving went completely unnoticed by audiences who watched the film, and the choking scene remains one of Christine's most memorable moments without anyone realizing that the actress never actually consumed any part of the hamburger that appears to be causing her character so much distress. Fact 11. Keith Gordon almost passed out from holding his breath. Keith Gordon's dedication to making Arnie's death scene as realistic and emotionally powerful as possible nearly resulted in the actor actually losing consciousness on camera, all because he decided to use a dangerous method acting technique without fully thinking through the physical consequences. The scene required Gordon to portray Arnie Cunningham dying after being thrown through Christine's windshield and impaled on a shard of glass. And in his final moments, the character reaches out desperately to touch his beloved car one last time before succumbing to his injuries. Gordon wanted to make sure that he looked appropriately flushed, red-faced, and oxygen-deprived during this death scene to sell the idea that Arnie was struggling to breathe and fighting for his last few seconds of life. So he came up with what seemed like a simple solution. He would just hold his breath for an extended period while the cameras were rolling to achieve that natural look of someone who can't get enough air. According to the stories shared on the film's DVD commentary track, Gordon held his breath for so long during the take that he actually came dangerously close to passing out completely because his brain wasn't getting enough oxygen and his body was starting to shut down from the prolonged lack of air. The irony is that Gordon was trying to fake the appearance of oxygen deprivation so convincingly that he nearly gave himself real oxygen deprivation in the process, and the crew became genuinely concerned about the actor's safety as they watched him turn increasingly red and struggle through the scene. Fortunately, Gordon managed to finish the take without actually losing consciousness, but the incident serves as a reminder of how far some actors will go to achieve authenticity in their performances. Fact 12. Keith Gordon purposely shocked. Alexandra Paul. Keith Gordon pulled off a sneaky bit of acting trickery to capture an authentic reaction from his co-star, Alexandra Paul, during one of Christine's most emotionally volatile scenes, and he did it by deliberately misleading her about how intense his performance was going to be when the cameras started rolling. The scene in question occurs at Darnell's garage after Christine has been vandalized and destroyed by Buddy Repperton's gang. And Arnie discovers the damage and becomes absolutely enraged, lashing out at everyone around him, including his girlfriend Lee, who he yells at and physically shoves backward in a sudden outburst of anger that shows just how much Christine's possession has changed him from a gentle nerd into someone capable of violence. During the rehearsal process leading up to filming this confrontation, Keith Gordon made a strategic decision to significantly tone down his performance and play the scene much more calmly and less aggressively than he actually planned to do in the final take, which meant that Alexandra Paul had no idea what was really coming and expected the real performance to be relatively similar to what she'd experienced during rehearsals. When director John Carpenter called action and the cameras started recording the actual scene, Gordon suddenly unleashed a much more intense and violent portrayal of Arnie's rage than anything Paul had seen before, yelling at her with genuine fury and shoving her backwards with unexpected force that caught her completely off guard. According to Gordon's explanation on the DVD commentary, the look of shock and fear on Alexandra Paul's face in that moment is absolutely real because she genuinely did not expect him to react so aggressively, and that authentic surprise added an extra layer of emotional truth to the scene that made it far more powerful and unsettling than it would have been if Paul had known exactly what to expect. Fact 13. The ending is a Jaws homage. The very last shot of Christine contains a deliberate reference to one of the most famous monster movies ever made, and director John Carpenter included this visual callback as both a tribute to a film he admired and a way to leave audiences with an unsettling feeling that the nightmare might not actually be over. After Dennis and Lee finally managed to destroy Christine by repeatedly crushing her with a bulldozer and then watching as her remains get compacted into a solid metal cube at the junkyard, the characters and the audience are meant to feel relieved that the possessed car has been defeated once and for all. The film seems to tease one final scare when the survivors suddenly hear 1950s rock and roll music that sounds like it could be coming from Christine's crushed remains, but it turns out to be just a worker's portable radio playing nearby, and everyone relaxes for a moment thinking it was a false alarm. However, Carpenter wasn't quite ready to let the audience off the hook that easily. So, in the final moments of the film, The camera slowly zooms in on the compacted cube of metal and scrap that used to be Christine. And just before the credits roll, a small piece of the car's distinctive chrome grille twitches and moves slightly as if something inside is still alive and trying to regenerate. This ending shot was Carpenter's intentional homage to Steven Spielberg's 1975 classic Jaws, which also ends with the suggestion that even though the monster has been killed, there might be more danger lurking out there somewhere in the future. Carpenter wanted audiences to leave the theater wondering whether Christine's evil spirit had truly been destroyed, or whether she might somehow find a way to rebuild herself and come back for revenge someday. Fact 14. Filmed in Halloween's neighborhood. John Carpenter made an interesting location choice when filming Christine by returning to the exact same Southern California neighborhood that he had used 5 years earlier for his groundbreaking horror masterpiece Halloween, creating an unexpected connection between two of his most famous films. Several scenes in Christine, particularly the sequences showing Arnie Cunningham's home and the residential streets where he lives with his overbearing parents, were shot in South Pasadena, which is a quiet suburban community located just outside of Los Angeles that has long been popular with film productions looking for that classic American neighborhood aesthetic with tree-lined streets and well-maintained houses. Carpenter had already established a strong familiarity with South Pasadena during the making of Halloween in 1978, when he used the area's residential streets to create the fictional town of Haddonfield, Illinois, where Michael Myers stalked his victims through seemingly safe and ordinary suburban neighborhoods that suddenly became terrifying hunting grounds. By the time Carpenter started working on Christine in 1983, he apparently felt comfortable enough with South Pasadena to return there for another production. And this decision likely saved time and money during the location scouting process, since the director already knew which streets would photograph well and which locations would work best for his vision of small-town California life. For sharp-eyed viewers who are familiar with both films, it's possible to spot some of the same residential areas appearing in both Halloween and Christine, though the two movies use the locations in completely different ways and create entirely different atmospheres despite sharing some of the same physical shooting locations 5 years apart. Fact 15. Book to screen in 8 months. Christine holds the remarkable distinction of being one of the fastest book-to-film adaptations in Hollywood history, with Stephen King's novel and John Carpenter's movie arriving in theaters within the same calendar year in a production timeline that would be almost impossible to replicate today. Stephen King's novel Christine was officially published in April of 1983, hitting bookstores across America and quickly becoming another bestseller for the prolific horror author who was already at the height of his popularity and cultural influence. Meanwhile, Columbia Pictures was so eager to capitalize on King's growing fame and the buzz surrounding this new book about a killer car that they rushed the film into production at an almost unprecedented speed, with director John Carpenter and his crew beginning principal photography in April of 1983, which was literally just days after the novel became available for purchase in stores. This meant that the cast and crew were shooting scenes and building their cinematic version of Christine, while most of America was still reading the book for the first time and forming their own mental images of what the possessed Plymouth Fury should look like. The entire production process, from the start of filming through post-production, editing, special effects work, and final preparation for theatrical release, was completed in approximately 8 months, allowing the finished film to premiere in theaters on December 9, 1983, less than a full year after the source material had been published. This breakneck pace from page to screen was driven by Columbia Pictures' desire to strike while the iron was hot and release the movie while King's name was still generating maximum publicity and audience interest. And the gamble paid off despite the compressed timeline.